Chapter 1. Immortality was never a dream. Death came without warning. One moment, he was alive, breathing, and thinking like any normal person, and the next moment, everything vanished into darkness. There was no pain, no falling sensation, and no light waiting for him at the end. There was only silence, endless and absolute, stretching on without time or meaning. Then a voice spoke from within the darkness, cold and mocking, as if it had been watching him the entire time. What an unimpressive death! His thoughts slowly returned, confusion following soon after. He could think clearly, and that alone told him one thing. He was not completely gone. Before he could question it further, the darkness around him shattered like broken glass, and a blast of freezing wind slammed into his body, forcing a sharp breath into his lungs. His eyes flew open, and the first thing he saw was the sky. It was vast and unfamiliar, filled with heavy clouds that drifted slowly overhead. In the distance, enormous mountains pierced through the clouds like ancient spears, giving the entire world an old and dangerous feeling that made his heart beat faster. This was not Earth. He pushed himself up from the ground, feeling cold dirt beneath his palms. The sensation was real, far too real to be a dream. As he breathed in again, he noticed something strange. The air felt thick, almost heavy, and with every breath, something unseen flowed into his body. It was not oxygen alone. It felt like energy. He looked down at his hands and froze. They were steady, smooth, and clearly younger than he remembered. The scars from his previous life were gone, and his body felt stronger than it had in years. Even a simple movement, like clenching his fist, felt effortless. Reincarnation? He muttered quietly. The same voice returned, this time sounding slightly amused. Relocation would be more accurate. A glowing blue screen appeared in front of his eyes, floating calmly in the air as if it belonged there. Immortality Sect system. Activated. Host status. Confirmed. World status. Imbalanced. He stared at the screen for several seconds before letting out a quiet laugh. The situation felt absurd, yet strangely familiar. In his previous life, he had read countless stories about people reincarnating into cultivation worlds with powerful systems guiding them forward. Most of those people dreamed of power, domination, revenge, or glory. He never cared about any of that. There had only ever been one thing that truly fascinated him. Immortality, he said, softly. To him, immortality was not a fantasy or a childish dream. It was the only goal worth pursuing. Power meant nothing if it ended, and everything in life eventually ended. Everything except eternity. The system flickered faintly, as if reacting to his thoughts. Before you become excited, it said, you should understand something important. This world does not cultivate immortality. His expression stiffened immediately. What do you mean? Images flooded his mind without warning. He saw warriors training their bodies until they could shatter stone and split mountains. He saw martial artists mastering inner energy, becoming legends feared and respected by all. Then he saw those same legends grow old, their strength fading as their bodies weakened until they finally died and were forgotten. They cultivate inner energy, the system explained calmly. Their strength increases and their lifespans extend slightly, but they remain bound by mortality. His jaw tightened as he absorbed the information. And me? Ask it. You are the anomaly, the system replied. The first and only cultivator of true immortality in this world. Excitement surged through him faster than he expected. He had spent his entire life obsessed with the concept of eternal existence, and now it was standing directly in front of him. Then teach me the method, he sighed calmly. I'm ready. The response came instantly. Requests denied. The words hit harder than he anticipated. Explain. You cannot cultivate immortality alone. The blue screen shifted, revealing a new message. Primary quest. Establish an immortality sect. Required disciples 10. Cultivation progress locked. Failure condition death. He stared at the screen and slowly exhaled. So that's the cost, he murmured. You want me to build a sect? He crossed his arms slightly. I don't need followers. I only need the path to immortality. The system responded with a quiet, mocking laugh. Then you do not need immortality either. As the laughter faded, the sky itself seemed to grow heavier. An invisible pressure pushed down on his shoulders, forcing him to steady his stance. The weight was not physical, but it carried an undeniable sense of authority. For the first time since arriving in this world, fear crept into his chest. "Fine," he said after a moment. "I'll build your sect." "Excellent," the system replied. The screen vanished, and reality rushed back in. Almost immediately, shouting echoed from somewhere nearby. Angry voices mixed with laughter and insults, drawing his attention. He turned toward the noise and walked forward until he reached a large clearing filled with people. At the center of the crowd, a young man knelt in the dirt. Blood stained his clothes, and a broken sword lay beside him. Yet his back remained straight and unyielding. An elder stood before him, his expression filled with cold disdain. "Bo," the elder commanded, "admit your inferiority and beg forgiveness." The young man lifted his head, eyes burning with stubborn defiance. "I would rather die," the crowd murmured as the elder raised his hand, violent inner energy gathering around his palm. "Then die." "Wait," the word cut through the clearing. Drawing every gaze toward him, the elder narrowed his eyes. "And who are you supposed to be?" He stepped forward calmly, hands behind his back. "He doesn't need to bow," he said. "He simply chose the wrong path." Laughter spread through the crowd. "A better path?" the elder mocked. He smiled faintly. "Yes," he replied, "I cultivate immortality." The laughter grew louder, and even the kneeling youth looked up in disbelief, convinced that the man before him was nothing more than a delusional madman. The elder waved his hand dismissively. "Kill them both." At that exact moment, the system whispered inside his mind. "First disciple candidate detected." His smile deepened slightly. "Good," he murmured. "Then let heaven watch carefully, because this world had lived for countless years without true immortality, and that mistake was about to end. Chapter 2. The first disciple. The clearing fell into an uneasy silence after the elder gave his order. The laughter from the crowd faded as uncertainty crept in, and more than a few people took an unconscious step back. No one understood why, but something about the calm attitude of the man who claimed immortality made them uneasy. The elder sneered, clearly irritated by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "Immortality," he said coldly. "You dare speak such nonsense in front of me?" His gaze swept over the crowd as if daring anyone to agree with the stranger. "This world has existed for thousands of years. If immortality were real, someone would have already achieved it." The man did not argue. He did not raise his voice or attempt to convince anyone. Instead, he turned his attention back to the kneeling youth, who remained silent with his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Blood continued to drip slowly from the corner of the young man's mouth, staining the dirt beneath him. "Tell me something," the man said calmly. "Can you cultivate inner energy?" The question stunned the crowd into silence. The elder frowned, sensing something was wrong, but the youth hesitated before finally answering. "No," the youth said quietly. "I was born without a meridian. I cannot circulate inner energy." A wave of murmurs spread through the clearing. Many looked at the kneeling youth with renewed disdain, while others nodded as if everything finally made sense. The elder laughed loudly. "A cripple," he said, "and you dare stand tall in front of me." The youth's jaw tightened, but he did not lower his head. "I may be unable to cultivate," he said, "but I will not bow." The man nodded slightly, as if confirming something he had already known. "That is because you were never meant to walk their path," he said, gesturing toward the elder and the surrounding martial artists. "Your path lies elsewhere." The elder's patience snapped. He raised his hand, and violent inner energy surged around his palm, causing the air to distort slightly. "Enough," he said. "Kill them." Several guards stepped forward, weapons drawn, but before they could move any closer, an invisible pressure spread through the clearing. It was subtle, yet suffocating, forcing the guards to hesitate. The elder's expression changed, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. The man ignored them all and crouched down in front of the kneeling youth. "Look at me," he said calmly. The youth hesitated, then slowly raised his head. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, The noise of the crowd seemed to fade away. The man saw anger there, bitterness, and years of humiliation. But beneath it all, there was something else. Hope. "Do you believe in immortality?" the man asked. The youth let out a weak, bitter laugh. "A delusion," he replied. "A lie people tell themselves because they are afraid of dying." The man smiled faintly. "Good," he said. "Blind faith is useless." The youth blinked in confusion. "Then why answer me one more question?" The man interrupted. "If there was a path where talent did not matter, where no one could force you to bow, and where death itself could be defied, would you walk it?" The youth's breathing grew uneven. "Even if such a path existed," he sighed slowly, "I would be hunted for following it." The man straightened and stood up. "Then you will not die as a dog," said calmly. He turned toward the elder. "You wanted to kill us, correct?" The elder snorted. "You have 10 breaths. That will be enough," the man replied. The system's voice echoed quietly inside his mind. Demonstration opportunity. Detected. A new screen flashed briefly before his eyes, invisible to everyone else. Temporary authority granted. Immortality seed. 1 use. Warning. Severe soul exhaustion. Pain exploded behind his eyes, sharp and immediate, as if something had been torn directly from his soul. His vision blurred, and blood slid down from the corner of his mouth, but he did not falter. Instead, he stepped forward and pressed his finger lightly against the youth's chest. "Do not resist," he said quietly. The youth froze. "What are you?" Light bloomed. It was not inner energy. It was purer, calmer, and far deeper. The air trembled violently, and the ground beneath their feet cracked slightly as something fundamental changed. Inside the youth's body, a golden thread formed, weaving itself through flesh and bone, replacing what had never existed. Meridians were not repaired. They were created. The youth gasped sharply, his body shaking as an unfamiliar sensation flooded his senses. The pain he had lived with his entire life vanished in an instant, replaced by a steady, endless flow of power. "I can feel it," he whispered. "I can actually feel it." The system's voice rang out coldly. Immortality cultivation initialized. The elder staggered backward, his face drained of color. "Impossible," he whispered. The man withdrew his hand, his breathing slightly heavier now. "Bo," he asked calmly. The youth shook his head and slowly rose to his feet. Power rippled faintly around him, not violent or overwhelming, but undeniable. "I will never bow again," he said. The clearing was deathly silent. The elder's hands trembled. "What? What are you?" The man wiped the blood from his lips and smiled faintly. "I'm building a sect," he said, "one that does not kneel to heaven." The system chimed once more inside his mind. First, disciple acquired. Progress, 1 of 10. Cultivation lock, partially released. The man looked at the youth, now standing tall for the first time in his life, and felt a strange sense of certainty settle in his chest. This was only the beginning. The world had taken its first step toward immortality, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 3. The Sect That Should Not Exist. The silence in the clearing lingered long after the system's notification faded from his mind. No one spoke. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. The crowd stared at the youth who had just stood up, their expressions filled with disbelief and unease. Moments ago, he had been a cripple, someone destined to be trampled underfoot for the rest of his life. Now, an unfamiliar aura surrounded him, subtle but undeniable, and it made even seasoned martial artists feel uneasy. The elder's face twisted as shock slowly turned into fear. He had seen countless techniques in his lifetime, strange arts and forbidden methods passed down through secret lineages, but this was different. There was no surge of violent inner energy, no explosive release of power, and no familiar circulation patterns. Whatever had just happened had completely overturned his understanding of cultivation. "This is heresy," the elder said hoarsely, more to himself than anyone else. "A demon art. It must be a demon art." The man shook his head calmly. "No," he replied. "Demons steal power. This creates a path. The youth glanced down at his hands, clenching and unclenching his fingers, as if afraid the sensation might disappear if he focused too hard on it. Power flowed through his body smoothly, without resistance or pain, and for the first time in his life, his breathing felt complete. He looked up at the man standing beside him, his expression complicated. "Why?" the youth asked quietly. "Why help me?" The man met his gaze. "Because you refused to bow? Asait simply, and because you were willing to die rather than surrender your will." The elder's expression darkened as realization struck him. If word of this spread, chaos would follow. Martial sects would panic. Families would investigate. And if others like this youth began to appear, the foundations of the entire martial world would tremble. He could not allow that to happen. "Kill them!" the elder barked suddenly. "All of them. Leave no witnesses." This time, the guards hesitated only briefly before charging forward, their killing intent unleashed without restraint. Inner energy flared violently, blades cutting through the air toward the man and the youth. The man exhaled slowly. "Stand behind me," he said calmly. The youth obeyed. Without hesitation, the system's voice echoed inside the man's mind, filled with unmistakable amusement. "You are severely weakened. Engaging in direct combat is not advised." "I know," the man replied silently. "That's why I won't fight." He stepped forward and raised his hand slightly. The air around him distorted, not from power, but from pressure. The guards froze mid-step, their faces contorting as if an invisible force had seized their bodies. Their weapons fell from numb fingers and clattered to the ground. The crowd erupted into panic. "What is this?" someone shouted. The elder staggered back, his heart pounding. This was not a technique he could recognize or counter. It was not strength overpowering weakness. It felt more like the world itself was refusing to move for the man's enemies. "This is your warning," the man said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the clearing. "Leave. Forget what you saw here, or die believing it was a nightmare." The elder clenched his teeth. "You think you can threaten a martial sect, elder?" he snarled. "Do you know how many experts will hunt you down?" The man smiled faintly. "Good," he replied. "That means you will spread the word for me." The pressure vanished instantly. The guards collapsed to their knees, gasping for breath, terror written across their faces. The elder stared at the man for several seconds before finally turning away, his pride screaming in protest, but his survival instincts winning out. "We're leaving," the elder snapped. "Now." The crowd scattered quickly, fear driving them faster than any command. Within moments, the clearing was nearly empty, leaving only the man and his first disciple standing together in the aftermath. The youth bowed deeply, far lower than he ever had, to the elder. But this time, it was by choice. "From this moment on, Asait firmly, my life belongs to the Immortality Sect." The man frowned slightly. "Do not bow to me," he said. "You are not my possession." The youth straightened, surprised. "If you follow me," the man continued, "it will be because you choose to walk this path. Immortality is not slavery. It is freedom." The youth nodded slowly, the words sinking deep into his heart. "Good," the man said. "Then we need to move. Staying here will only attract trouble." As they walked away from the clearing, the system chimed softly once more. Sect foundation pending. Disciples required, 9 remaining. System shop locked. Warning, demon activity detected in nearby regions. The man glanced toward the distant mountains, his expression thoughtful rather than afraid. Demons ruled part of this world, feeding on death and harvesting power from fallen cultivators. Until now, they had never encountered true immortality. That would change. Behind him, his first disciple followed in silence, his steps steady and his posture straight. For the first time in his life, the future no longer looked like a dead end. And somewhere beyond the mountains, forces far older and more dangerous than any martial sect began to stir, because a sect that should not exist had taken its first breath. Chapter 4. Those who cannot cultivate. They did not travel far before the world reminded them how unforgiving it was. The road away from the clearing was rough and rarely used, winding between broken stone and thin forests that offered little shelter. As they walked, the youth Null, the first disciple of the Immortality Sect, kept glancing at his hands, as if afraid the power flowing through his body might vanish at any moment. "It's real," the man said without looking back. "The feeling won't disappear." The youth hesitated before speaking. "If what you gave me is truly immortality," he said carefully, "why would anyone believe us?" The man smiled faintly. "They won't," he replied. "Not at first." They continued walking until the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the land. By nightfall, they reached a small settlement tucked between the hills. It was barely more than a cluster of worn buildings, surrounded by a crumbling wooden fence. Weak lantern light flickered along the streets, and the air carried the smell of exhaustion and quiet despair. "This is where we start," the man said. The youth frowned. "This place doesn't even have a martial sect." "Exactly," the man replied. They entered the settlement without drawing much attention. Most of the residents were ordinary people, farmers and laborers who had long since accepted that cultivation was not meant for them. Martial arts belonged to clans and sects, not to people like this. Here, injuries meant permanent disability, and sickness often meant death. The man stopped near a group of people gathered outside a small building that served as both a clinic and a shelter. Groans of pain leaked through the thin walls. Inside, several figures lay on simple beds, their bodies twisted from old injuries that had never healed properly. "These people cannot cultivate," the man said quietly. "Some were born without talent. Some were crippled by martial artists passing through. Some tried and failed." The youth's expression tightened. "And that's why you chose this place." "Yes," the man said. "Immortality does not begin with the strong. It begins with those who were denied even the chance." They entered the building, drawing a few wary looks. An older woman stood near the back, her posture stiff as she watched them approach. "If you're here to sell medicine," she said, "we don't have coin." "I'm not here to sell anything," the man replied calmly. "I'm here to teach." Laughter rippled weakly through the room. "Teach what?" someone asked bitterly. "How to suffer less." The man shook his head. "How to cultivate." That earned sharper laughter. "We don't have meridians," another voice said, "or talent." "I know," the man replied. "That's why you're here." Silence followed. The youth stepped forward, hesitating only briefly before rolling up his sleeve. He released a trace of his power, just enough for the air to shift and the lamps to flicker. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was unmistakably different from inner energy. Several people stiffened. "That power," someone whispered, "it feels calm." The man spoke again. "Inner energy breaks the body over time. Immortality refines it. It does not reject those without talent. It was created for them." Suspicion filled their eyes, but something else appeared as well. Desperation. A man lying on one of the beds let out a quiet laugh. "If you're lying," he said weakly, "then nothing changes. If you're telling the truth," his voice trembled, "then we finally have something to lose." The man nodded. "I won't force anyone," he said. "Those who wish to leave may do so now. No one move." The system's voice echoed faintly in his mind. "Recruitment conditions detected. Belief threshold required." He extended his hand toward the injured man. "I can't promise immortality overnight," he said calmly. "But I can promise a path." The man swallowed hard. "Do it!" The moment his hand touched the injured man's chest, a faint warmth spread through the room. It was gentler than before, slower, but unmistakable. The injured man gasped as feeling returned to parts of his body that had been numb for years. "I can feel my legs," he whispered. The room erupted into chaos. Cries filled the air as disbelief shattered into raw emotion. Some fell to their knees. Others laughed uncontrollably. The youth stood frozen, watching something he had never imagined possible. The system chimed softly. 2 disciples acquired. 3 disciples acquired. 4 disciples acquired. The man exhaled slowly. This was harder than fighting elders, harder than facing demons, because belief was fragile, and once shattered, it could never be repaired. He looked around the room and spoke calmly, his voice steady and unwavering. "From this moment forward, you are disciples of the Immortality Sect. You will suffer, you will doubt, but if you endure, you will never be abandoned by this path." Outside, the night wind stirred, carrying the news farther than any of them realized. In places ruled by martial sects and in lands claimed by demons, faint ripples spread through fate itself. Something had changed, and the Immortality Sect was no longer an idea. It was real. Chapter 5. The world begins to listen. Rumors rarely arrive as threats. They come disguised as jokes, as casual gossip exchanged over cheap wine or whispered between travelers resting their feet at roadside inns. At first, the stories surrounding the Immortality Sect were treated no differently. A strange man teaching crippled villagers. People who had never held inner energy suddenly standing straighter, breathing deeper, moving without pain. A so-called cultivation path that did not rely on talent, bloodline, or inherited manuals. To most who heard it, the idea was laughable, and laughter spread faster than belief ever could. But laughter fades when it repeats too often. By the time the third group of merchants passed through the region, the rumors had grown heavier, no longer told with mockery but with unease. Too many witnesses described the same details without contradiction. The same calm pressure in the air, the same sensation of warmth spreading through broken bodies, the same unsettling realization that this power did not feel like inner energy at all, but something slower, deeper, and far more stable. What truly unsettled people was not the power itself, but the reaction of those who should have crushed it. The martial sect elder who had encountered the Immortality Sect had withdrawn completely, issuing strict orders for his disciples to avoid the area. No challenges were made, no investigations announced, no public denunciations issued. In a world ruled by pride and dominance, silence from the strong was the clearest sign of fear. Within a secluded mountain range, a respected martial sect convened an emergency meeting. Elders gathered beneath an ancient stone ceiling etched with generations of battle records. Their expressions, grim as reports, were laid out before them. Scouts described a growing group of disciples who trained without traditional stances, whose breathing patterns did not match any known method, and whose bodies showed signs of refinement without the violent fluctuations of inner energy. "This contradicts everything we know," one elder said sharply. "If cultivation does not demand talent, then what separates us from commoners?" Another elder did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the reports, fingers tightening slowly. "Perhaps," he said at last, "the question is whether it ever truly should have." The room grew quiet. That single thought was more dangerous than any new technique. Martial sects were built on exclusivity, on the belief that strength was earned by birthright, sacrifice, or ruthless competition. A path that erased those barriers threatened more than power. It threatened identity. No open action was approved that night, but scouts were dispatched in silence. Observation was no longer optional. Whatever this Immortality Sect was becoming, it could not be allowed to grow unchecked. Far beyond the influence of human martial sects, in lands corrupted by bloodshed and shadow, the rumors reached ears far more sensitive to change. Demon clans relied on death as nourishment, harvesting the remnants left behind when cultivators fell. Their strength was built upon a predictable cycle. Humans cultivated, humans fought, humans died, and demons consumed what remained. For generations, that cycle had never failed. Until now, in a cavern carved deep beneath blackened stone, a demon commander stared at a cracked bead resting in his claw. Its glow was dim, unstable, lacking the richness it should have carried. He crushed it slowly, watching the energy dissipate into nothing. "This bead should have fed me for days," he growled. "Instead, it is hollow." A lesser demon knelt nearby, his voice cautious as he spoke. "There are reports," he said, "humans cultivating in a way that preserves their essence. Their deaths, when they occur, do not yield proper harvest." The commander's eyes narrowed, a dangerous light flickering within them. "If humans learn to avoid dying correctly, size slowly, then our growth stagnates. If our growth stagnates, then this world begins to reject us." Orders were given without further discussion. Hunters were sent not to conquer, but to confirm. Whatever this new path was, it could not be allowed to mature unchecked. Back in the settlement, the man remained unaware of how many eyes had begun to turn toward him. At dawn, he stood quietly among his disciples, observing their progress as they practiced under his guidance. Their movements were slow and imperfect, lacking the sharp aggression of martial techniques. But their breathing was steady, and their bodies showed subtle signs of change with each passing day. Some still doubted. Some still feared that this path would invite disaster, but none could deny the results. The first disciple approached him quietly, watching the others with an expression caught between pride and concern. "They talk at night," he said. "About the rumors, about sects and demons." "They should," the man replied calmly. "Fear sharpens awareness." The system's voice echoed lazily in his mind, layered with its usual mockery. "Congratulations. You have successfully drawn the attention of multiple power structures while operating far below recommended strength levels." "I didn't come here to hide," the man answered. "Excellent," the system replied, "because hiding is no longer an option. Hostile convergence probability continues to rise. Suggestion: expand recruitment efficiency and prepare defensive contingencies." The man looked over his disciples once more, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper within him. Immortality was not something the world would accept gently. It challenged the natural order, the balance maintained through struggle and death. But balance was not peace. It was stagnation. And stagnation, sooner or later, always led to collapse. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the settlement, the man understood that the Immortality Sect had crossed an invisible threshold. It was no longer a secret experiment, hidden among the forgotten. The world had begun to listen, and soon it would respond.